I don't know that I see Bill this morning, but thank you to Bill for covering for me last week while I was out of town. Greatly appreciate Bill doing that. He actually texted me yesterday or the day before and said, hey, are you going to be back? Because I'd be happy to cover again. And I tried to get him to cover, but if I was going to be back, he said I needed to do it. So you're stuck with me today. What I'd like to do, because there was that week gap, is maybe just recap what we talked about in our first class, and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll jump into the content material for today. So if you remember, the title of the class is Living a Life That Matters. There's Bill. Hey, Bill, thanks for covering last week. Really appreciate it. It's living a life that matters. And so if you think back to the first class that we had, we talked a little bit about, why do you believe in God? What's the difference between faith and belief? And why do you have faith in God? And really the goal there was to really get us to think a little bit about, what is driving our beliefs, right? Why do we believe? And then, taking it to the next step of, why do we have faith that what we read in the Bible, is true? And that why do we have faith that God is going to do the things that he said, he would do in the Bible? So that was kind of week one, which kind of goes back to, the chart that I want to use as we progress through this, right? So if you think about it, we kind of started with beliefs. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you have faith? And then, beliefs and values. But what we're really going to talk about the next, for the remainder of the class, is we're going to talk really about attitudes and behaviors. So today we're going to spend a little time in Ephesians 5, and then also we're going to spend some time in, I believe it's Colossians 3. I'll probably use notes a little more today than I normally would. I generally like to walk around, but as I was preparing on the plane home yesterday, I realized that I didn't have my computer in front of me to type all my notes, and so I think I studied for like 4 or 5 hours, but I still feel like I'm not adequately prepared for today. So what was really interesting as I was preparing, and I really never thought about this, but I spent a lot of time before I left on Ephesians 5 and breaking Ephesians 5 down. I don't know if you want to turn there. Really the focus in Ephesians will be 5 verses 1 through 20. And when you look at those 20 verses, they're actually broken into 3 separate general behaviors. The general theme is walk, but verses 1 and 2 are walk in love, and then verses 3 through 14 are walk in light, and then verses 15 through 20 are walk in wisdom. And it talks about, each of those. But what I found interesting is, as I was preparing for today and looking at some other scriptures referenced in the commentary, I was really interested in how much Colossians 3 was similar to Ephesians 5. I had never really made the connection or compared the two, but when I went through each of them side by side, I thought there were a lot of similarities between the two. So let's start with Ephesians 5. I'm going to read through all 20 verses, and then I just want to talk through them and ask you some questions as we progress through them. So I'll start in verse 1, and I'll go ahead and read through 20. Ephesians 5, verse 1. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you, there must be not even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such thing, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. I really want to talk a little bit about that verse 7 when we get to it. For you were once darkness, but now you are the light in the Lord. Live as children of the light. For the fruit of lightness consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases God. Have nothing to do with fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is what is said. Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. In the last few verses here. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart in the Lord. Always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. So what we have there is some real specific instruction on things that we should and shouldn't do from a behavior perspective. And so, I just want to get what your take is on some of these instructions, right? I mean, we can read them here, we can see them here, but, to get the discussion started, if you had to describe in your words, walk in the way of love, what's that look like to you? We're talking about how we can live a life, right? That matters. So what does walk in the way of love mean to you? What's that look like for us as Christians? Anyone? Mario.
I see it here all the time, when we're walking in between, classes and service, and someone comes up to you, hi, hug, give you a hug, whatever. Well, I think it's even more important that we do it out in the world so they can see the difference in us, so that they can maybe ask, you always in a good mood, why are you in a good mood all the time, or something, and helping somebody out, showing it, living out what we're supposed to be doing, instead of where we can get caught up in the world and we don't get the best of service at a restaurant or at a store or something. It's very easy to get irritated and angry instead of showing kindness. I remember one time when I was a very young trooper and I was in that mode of being a trooper all the time. Someone tried to accuse me at the store I gave them a 20 and they would give me change for a 10, and I got very irritated about it. And I said, no, I gave you a 20. Go get your manager, bring her over here. I want you to count this drawer, this and that. She walked away, and my very wise wife said, she just made a mistake, right? And I was like, yeah, I felt about this big. And so you have to show love even when things aren't going right, so that they can see a difference and you're not acting like the world.
Yeah, I mean, what I heard you describe, walking behavior, it's really all about our behaviors, right? Both in the church and then outside the church, absolutely. And listen, all of us have been there, right? We are not having the day that we like to have, we're dealing with somebody that maybe we can't, relate to as well as we can with others, and we just get short with them, right? So that's great. What else? Anyone else?
Tolerance. Highest level of tolerance. No matter what situation you're in. Making a difference. Making a difference no matter what situation you're in. To be that example who's ever around you. Like you said, Jason, it's not easy. But through Christ you can do anything. And I think the idea is to have the moment when you have that opportunity and be aware of it. Because I came home the other day and I kind of had an attitude. And I told my husband, you know what, I got an attitude right now.
At least you warned him, right?
I got a real attitude that said, here's what happened, 3 times something happened. I think that's my opportunity to realize that I need to stop, start praying. And I think it was in my favor that I would have had that attitude, and I wanted to be in that attitude, but no, I want to change it. I didn't like it. Do you know when you're in that attitude?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a bit chippy this morning after a really, really long flight yesterday. So, and I don't even really mean to be. I just I am, right? So.
It's easy being here. This is all easy being here. Then you go out in the world, go to work tomorrow morning, and your coworkers, that's the real tester, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I heard from both of you is patience, right? And really awareness, right? Having, the awareness of where we are, what our mood is as we're approaching the situation, and then learning to be patient, not just with our spouse, but others around us, right? And if you think of those things and, what God, how God treats us and what God expects from us. It's a two-way street there. He's often patient with us and, our shortcomings and the things that we, don't do that we should be doing, right? And so, great. Anybody else? Before we move on to verses 3 through 4. And let's see. The other point that the Kaufman commentator made here is being an imitator of God, right? When we talk about verses 1 and 2. I mean, really, that's what we're talking about when we're walking in love. If you think about imitators of God. And, the commentary said, the New Testament teaches that the only practical revelation of God is that of Christ himself. And in a view of imitating God is a commandment to be fully fulfilled by walking in love, right? So our commandment here is to walk in love and to be an imitator of Christ, right? So that's how this chapter starts. Now you begin to get into the specifics as you transition to verses 3 really through. We'll kind of take a look at we'll break them into 3 and 4. So, but among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which is out of place, but rather thanksgiving. So what's interesting, if you look at the commentary, Kaufman's commentary on verses 3 and 4, it goes on to say, all of the different areas in the New Testament where Paul lists all the different sins that we really, I think fall victim to more often than not. And so I went and pulled all of them. And what's really interesting is, there's Romans 1 in verse right around the 28 to 29. There's 1 Corinthians 5, 1 Corinthians 6, Galatians 5, and Colossians 3, which we'll get to in a minute. And almost every one of those, when you read them, there is either, this exact verbiage or, a more extensive description of the sins that we fall victim to. And so when you think about, I want to focus on kind of the coarse joking, right? And I want to focus on the term which are out of place, right? So it kind of leads us to being in conversations that we shouldn't be in, right? So, how many times have you been in a conversation, right? And either with someone in the world or, someone in the church that you really just, shouldn't have been in. And this really kind of focuses, you in on that. And so let's talk for a minute. I mean, what are those conversations that, you get into or you've gotten into that we shouldn't be in? And how do we more purposefully avoid them? I can think of one, like gossip, right? It's not specifically mentioned here, right? But is gossiping really any different than, the specific, don'ts here? Is it? No, really, it's not. So how do we avoid gossip? Like what can we do, to kind of rise above it? It's really easy to get sucked into it. You can just be having a conversation with somebody and you're sucked in. So first, let's start with this. Anybody have a conversation or part of a conversation that you've been in that you shouldn't have been in that you want to share, right? Bill, you're laughing back there. Never, Bill? So you're going to go first, Bill, right? And then let's talk about gossip specifically, right? So anybody want to share a conversation that you've been part of?
Let's define gossip. Now, a lot of times I will get in a conversation and with another Christian or member of the family, we're simply discussing people.
Yeah.
We're not talking down about them, but we are talking about them. Maybe they're having difficulties and we're concerned about them, or something wonderful's happening, we're concerned about that. Nevertheless, we're discussing people. So not everything is gossip.
I think that's an excellent point you just said there. So there's a difference between talking about people and gossip, right? So what I heard you say is there's a level of concern, in your, there's either, so what you said, and I'll come to you, Bill, you said there's a level of concern, right? You're talking about them, and what you're discussing is kind of in their best interest, or in some cases, there's maybe an element of celebration because something good happened to them. That's just, that's great, right? But so maybe it's the intent, and I think sometimes you can go into a conversation with that intent, and it might, kind of get off course, right? So yeah, I mean, listen, we should be talking about each other, right? And we have struggles here that, sometimes are expressed publicly, sometimes, we hear about. So I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about one another. I think it's just, where does the concern stop and the gossip start? Bill, go ahead.
That's the voice of wisdom right there. I mean, we need to listen to what she said, because that's truly, I remember being in lessons about gossip, and it's that second word on your list up there is attitude, right? And so you can talk about someone with loving kindness and consideration and say a lot about them. Or you can talk about somebody with an attitude of resentment and disgust, right? And it's that transition that you have to watch out for if you're going to talk about somebody, right? If you're not willing to pray about, if you're not willing to transition your thoughts and words into prayer, then that probably shouldn't be said to somebody else in conversation.
Yeah.
And it's that attitude of, okay, like Jeannie was talking about, if you're talking about somebody with concern and consideration, that's right on the verge of praying for them, right? But if you're talking about somebody with, resentment and, maybe a little hostility or whatever, bad attitude, then that's your sign, right? That's your, well, I wouldn't be saying this in prayer, so I certainly shouldn't be saying it out loud to somebody else, right? And it's the ability to catch yourself if you do that, if you are in discussion, or if you hear somebody making that transition, or even starting off on that bad attitude. Saying, well, how about those tigers? I mean, it's that ability to pivot is an art. I mean, it's an art that has to be learned. It's not something that we're born with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Bill, you make a lot of great points. And once again, one of the reasons why we're talking about this in here is because the focus is living a life that matters. And so, when I was studying for this, I put a lot of thought into, like, where am I, in here? And I really focused on, like, where do my conversations transition, right? And so, having a discussion like this hopefully plants seeds for us, right? And so if we're in those situations, we recognize, where the concern stops and where the gossip starts, right? So I think both wonderful points, and really kind of the whole point of discussing it. Any others on really gossip or just conversations in general? That I realized there's a lot of conversations I should avoid that potentially could be classified as gossip, from studying for the lesson and from having to really put some thought into it, right? Tina.
Well, this section on walk in love, and then he lists specific sins. I think part of the point might be our sin affects other people. Therefore, do we really love them? When when you have a conversation and you walk away, is the person better for that conversation, or have you left them upset, or with the not your influence has been lessened by what you said to them? Because if we walk in love, any one of these sins affects them and their spirituality. They didn't sin, I did, but I affected their spiritual walk perhaps. And so, are they better when I left after that conversation, or did I say a lot of things that might have been true but unnecessary?
Ooh, yes, that's so true. Like, you are 100% right. So, the goal here would be to recognize conversations that we just shouldn't be part of, or we don't need to be part of, because they're not, constructive for the purpose of encouraging people, and really they're not us being a good example for those around us, right? So, I mean, my self-examination here was like, yeah, I mean, you need to really be more aware of when you're having a constructive conversation that, is based on, your care and concern for somebody, or when you're just talking about somebody, you know, in a way that maybe not, it wasn't intentionally malicious, but maybe it becomes malicious because you're criticizing them for things that you really don't need to or have no reason to criticize them for. Maybe you're just having a tough day.
Gossip, yeah, I have a tough day. I think this day and age, it's not uncommon, trust me. I think I have a talk that's called gossip, and you can do research on it. But the thing of it is, if you're not being beneficial, like you just said, Jason, for that person, you need to stop there and say, you know what? We have to come to a solution what to really do about it. So let's just go ahead and start praying about it, and just leave it at that. Let God take over. God's got it.
Yeah.
He's got it in the end, anyhow.
No, you're right. Well, and listen, when you're going through, what's really interesting, and I thought a lot about this, when you're going through Scripture, you know, there's a lot of things in here, and really all of those verses that I mentioned, that I just don't know that are necessarily as applicable to this audience, right? I mean, you know, there's just like, I don't know that greed is a concern, you know, for the majority of this audience, right? Like, I don't know that, you know, any kind of impurity or sexual immorality is something that, you know, we would spend a lot of time in here talking about. But, you know, something like our dialogue, our conversations, our intent, you know, those are things I think we as a group of believers need to focus on and spend our time on as, you know, sins or potential sins that we could more easily become, you know, victims to, right? So.
Waterford Church of Christ is a mature congregation. Most of the people here are mature in their Christianity. And I think Jason has a lot to do with it because they're older, where they have a lot more wisdom, and they've been there, done that. Do you know what I'm saying? So basically the whole, the big picture is that they moved on into the more important things of Christianity, maybe. And that, I think, is that's why everybody loves Waterford. God has been so gifted. I mean, we've been so gifted and blessed to have this. I mean, we are so blessed to have this. Because that's what's happening right now. I feel. I don't know if anybody else wants to agree, but it's all God's working.
Absolutely. No, I agree, Lila. I love the point and love the participation. Now, if we look at, I'm gonna read verse 6, but so, and then I want to spend a little time on verses 6 and 7. So, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such thing, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. So, when you hear, you know, no one deceive you with empty words and do not be partners with them, you know, that makes me think of the company we keep, right? And once again, the conversations we have. So I was spending a lot of time thinking about a recent event that happened and company, you know, that is kept. And a person who's a Christian and then a person who's not a Christian, right? I'm going to try to be careful about how I describe this. But they had a close relationship. And you know, it was interesting to watch the person who was not a Christian and their attempts to influence the person who was a Christian. And out of that came a topic that I hope we can spend a lot of time on. Shannon and I just talked a lot about this yesterday, is tolerance, okay? So you kind of said this earlier, but I'm not thinking about tolerance in the form of patience. I'm thinking tolerance in the form of accepting, you know, so we have this problem in society, I think, and hopefully this is a topic we can talk about a little bit, but, you know, oftentimes the world has painted it where if we aren't tolerant of something, then we're really bad people, right? Like if we don't accept, you know, what the sin that somebody does, if we don't accept their lifestyle, then we are really bad people because, you know, life is about just, you know, being who you want to be and loving who you want to love and, you know, doing what you want to do as long as you're happy, right? And so when we have those relationships, or when you just think of the media nowadays, right? You know, there's a culture of tolerance, and that culture of tolerance we have to be very careful of as Christians, right? Because of the influence it can have, you know, on us, and equally the influence we can have on those people who aren't of faith by, you know, not necessarily being intolerant, but by showing them what's right, by showing them what God, you know, wants to do, right? So can any of you think of, and I can go deeper if we need to, but can any of you think of either relationships or maybe, you know, interactions historically where you were dealing with someone who wasn't a believer, and, this whole topic of, tolerance, or potentially you could see their influence on you. If you did, what'd you recognize? And, how did you change your behavior? Was there any point in that relationship where maybe you thought they're having more of an influence on me than I'm having on you? So any takers on that?
I look at these verses, and it starts out being imitators of God. Then it lists behaviors and sin, and then it talks about the walk. And sometimes we have to be careful too. Absolutely, we don't want to become people around people and sin, but we also don't want to be afraid to shine our light and be part. Because if we partake in the sins, then we show our hypocrisy of what the church is supposed to be. That Jesus hung around sinners a lot.
Yeah.
And I think we cannot be afraid to do that too. You can't be so closed that you can't shine your light.
Absolutely.
And work life, okay, and everything I do at work, I'm around majority of non-believers. And sometimes, I sin, and I have to bring that back and, apologize and do the things that I do to shine that light. But I'm around sin every day. And you just have to we have to be studied enough and confident enough in ourselves to understand that we're going to be around sin.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the reality of it is to kind of stick with the work theme, and then I want to talk about a personal one that I've observed for, many years. So, if you are doing the right thing, right, and you're right, we all sin, like people will recognize in the workplace, right? I mean, they will recognize that you are different. And it's probably the greatest place, because we spend so much time there, for people who aren't necessarily believers to recognize that we are different and inquire, about why we're different, right? I think, I was transitioning from, one, job to another in the past week, and I had an opportunity to just observe what people say about you, right? And it's interesting, the notes that you get from people. And I had a conversation with somebody who highlighted, just how different I was, and, how people viewed me with the level of integrity because of the way I conducted myself. And so you wouldn't necessarily hear that, just in your everyday, because they're not going to say, but you're leaving, so they take the opportunity to, communicate that. So, it's one of those things where if we're doing those things each and every day, we go to work dinners, we may behave differently than they do. There may be different things that happen, in the workplace. We respond differently than others. That's our opportunity to be a light and to be, different. Phil.
I think the key word there is partner, right? Don't partner with these people. So, you have to live in the world,
Yeah.
but you don't have to be of the world. So, I think that's the big difference there, that we are to be that light, like you're saying. But you don't want to get into bed with those people.
Absolutely.
Be that partner which also enables them. If you're doing that, then you're enabling them to continue in the sin.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I'm going to come to you. Let me just share one other thing. Tina, I thought of you a lot when I was reading this because of your friendship with Sue and with others, right? Very faithful member of the church for many, many years. You had close friends, who weren't believers. They knew exactly, who you were, what you were, but you guys were really, 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 really tight. And you didn't let their influence, wear off on you. And, my guess would be that you had a much more positive influence over your 20, 30-year friendship on them. And so you're the one person I can think of who's held those friendships for many, 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 many years. And I've just been impressed by your ability to, influence them more than they influenced you. So come over here.
I think as Christians, we need to realize that the whole concept of Christianity is under attack. We've got to realize that evil people are brilliant at marketing. For example, pro-choice. You're killing a baby and you throw it out there as this is something good. If somebody makes a stand against like homosexuality, they're called a homophobe. And if you don't like something, evil things that somebody does, they label you as, you know, anti-whatever. We are expected to be a peculiar people, and that is we're supposed to stand. And what is found is that when someone makes a stand for right, other people come out of the woodwork and they don't remain silent, and they actually stand up in support of the one who is the one standing up. But so that our job is tough out there, and you know, we're under attack as a Christian because of the world we live in.
You're 100%.
Yeah, we are expected to be peculiar. We're expected to stand firm and speak up. A lot of times, silence is
Acceptance in a lot of ways.
As construed as acceptance.
Yeah. I've got a really good story about that. So you actually are setting up the transition to the next part of the conversation, and that was perfect, because I think we need to spend a little bit more time on this whole tolerance and, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, kind of how we should think about it and what we should do about it. But to kind of go back to partnering with them, right? So, you know, I think one of the most critical areas for us to think about, especially those of us, you know, who are parents, is, you know, who your you know, children date, right? And I think I used this example in my first class. You know, I didn't grow up in the church. You know, I was a hoodlum. I met, you know, Shannon, total hoodlum, right? And Shannon made it really, really, really clear right out of the gate. Like, if you aren't interested in church, I'm not interested in you, right? And I was interested enough in her to become interested enough in church, and that, that changed my life. Now, at what point would have Shannon, you know, cut it off had I not grown interested in church just, 6 or 8 weeks into our, getting to know one another? But, as parents, we really have to be, cognizant of who our children, date and how long, we allow them to date non-believers before we, interject into, getting them to think about the implications of that, right? Because that is the ultimate partnering right there, right? And it's really easy. And so listen, we go through this in my house, which is what I'm talking about, right? So this is not something that I'm just, I'm just coming up with, make believe, right? This is a conversation we have, pretty regularly, and it's something, that we live with on the regular, right? So, as parents, like, we have to make that choice of when do you step in, right? Like, when do you step in and you say to your son or your daughter, like, is he or she really going to be someone who leads you closer to Christ, or are they not, right? And that can create friction, it can create a lot of friction. I had one of those conversations literally like this week, no joke, right? So, you have to be bold, and you have to understand that as parents, your job is not to be their friend. Like, it's really not. Like, your job is to make sure they're saved, okay? And the closer they get to someone who's not saved, like, the harder it is, to influence them, to change that person. It's got to be early. It's got to be often. And if you think that you're just going to delay it, right? Like, oh, well, it'll get better. It'll fix itself. Well, at some point, it gets so far along that it can't be unfixed, right? Like, it's just there. And then you have to deal with ramifications of it, for potentially the rest of their lives. So, how you go about those conversations, that's the hard part. But really understanding that those conversations are necessary for us as parents, if we want our kids to be saved, because, unequally yoked, especially if you're, I'm gonna say something that could be perceived as sexist, so I apologize, especially if you're a guy. If you're a guy and you don't marry a woman who's strong, in the faith, she's way more likely to influence you than, vice versa, right? Like, so, I mean, the women are usually the ones here without their husbands more often than not, right? So I'm not trying to offend anybody with that, but I see women tend to be much more spiritually grounded, and they tend to kind of pull the men along. Thank you, Shannon Currie. I really appreciate that, because without her, I wouldn't be standing here teaching, you all today. So I just think, with that particular verse, it was worth spending a little time on that, because once again, We want to live a life that matters. And our job, for those of you who are parents, especially parents who may be dating, you need to be, we have this conversation all the time about the desire to have our kids meet Christian spouses. And, there's many people in the church who have kids who are in that, we'll call it 17 to 22, 23, 24. And it's hard, for them, the older they get, to meet, people of faith, right? And you have to be more intentional about it. Lila, you were going to say something?
Well, the thing of it is, our culture's changed right now. I mean, nothing's new under the sun, Ecclesiastes, but the thing of it is, our culture in our country, and all the people you're dealing with, this has been such a big change. It's unbelievable. And you parents that are raising kids, I mean, how can you do that, Jason, without that? Our generation was, our parents said, we had this discussion out in the hallway just now with another couple, is my way or the highway. We respected our parents, that they were this. But the thing of it is now, and I heard this again the other day by research, they are raising their children by choice. By choice. Let's negotiate. How about if we negotiate? Negotiate about what? I'm the people here, I'm the authority, I'm paying the bills. And parents are free to negotiate.
And so
I would say there are people and grandparents in this congregation that do not agree with that.
yeah, I mean, listen,
Obviously, I believe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but many years, there was a prayer for my daughter to marry somebody. I prayed the opposite. When you look at who we are and how strong we are and be willing to stand in faith and to stand on God's word is what it means. I do not call it the love drug. We raised 3 girls. A lot of baptized believers out of that. We did a great job, right? But the world is an evil place. And when we come here and we talk about living that life, we have to remember that we are our brother's keeper. What does that mean? Does that mean when you go home at the dinner table and you talk, or you pray for people in the congregation? What does that do to the teenagers? We are here 52, maybe 104, maybe another 50 hours a week in this church building. We go off to work. We try to fit in because we're not confident in what we do or what we believe in. You must guard your heart, because at every point, that heart is wanted by Satan.
Oh, you're right. Well said, Peggy. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to say this. One of the things about my class is we're going to talk about hard stuff, right? And we're not always going to agree, on hard stuff. The whole point of the way I do is I want you to think, right? And Peggy, to your point, like as a parent, like you can do all the right things and it still won't work out. Because at the end of the day, like kids have free will, right? They get to choose.
I do want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
We raised our girls in Rochester when Rochester was a very healthy, strong conversation. But what I saw was when those young adults came back from Abilene or whatever, Jesus was no longer enough. So the kids went off to Kensington or wherever, and the parents followed them. My advice to any parent is never change. You raise
Amen.
them in the church, you keep them in the church, and you know that prodigal son will come home.
Yeah, there's going to be gaps, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it happens. No, I mean, Peggy, those are amazing comments.
You cannot give up your faith or your belief. You cannot, ever.
No, you're 100%
For
right.
your spouse, for yourself, for your children, for your grandchildren, for your in-laws. You cannot.
Yeah, very heartfelt and very, accurate comments, right? And once again, purpose of the class here is for us to talk about, things like that. And my point of parents having difficult conversations was, if the kids are just left to make choices unchecked without any, influence, Or a lot of times, we had a funny story last night. Taylor, can I share the car story? so this is how naive kids are at times, right? I feel like I do a pretty good job of educating my kids on the world and finances and things of that nature. So Taylor asks last night about getting a new car. He has a car with like 50,000 miles. We gave it to him, Shannon's car, a 2021 car. And so he asked about getting a new car, and he's looking at cars, and he's like, hey, do you care if I trade in my car and get another car? I'm like, well, before you do that, you probably ought to get a job so you can pay for it, right? You're welcome to do that. I gave you the car, but you substitute teach all year. You're going to play basketball overseas again in the fall, hopefully. And he's like, well, what? Like, you don't just trade in your car and they give you another car? And Shannon and I just were like, what have we done? so once again, as parents, we have to guide our children because they don't even understand at times. But our wisdom, our experience in life, is such that we need to, make them aware. We need to guide them. But at the end of the day, they're still going to choose, right? But do we feel better about saying the right things and educating them on the front end, and them making a bad choice versus not saying them and then wishing, that we had said all the right things? So, that was really the point, of that discussion. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to spend some time just kind of talking about tolerance and, the world. And you said so many good things, that as Christians, I guess, how do we deal with this culture of us being viewed or being labeled as intolerant when we, don't support or agree with, the things the world wants us to support and agree with? And you named, a number of those. So any thoughts on that before we wind up here in 60 seconds or less?
Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
There you go.
Right.
We can certainly forgive them. How can we, Joel?
In any case, with any people we run into, there's always going to be a question in our minds. Did we say enough? Did we say the right things? Did we say too much? That's where our faith in God and our trust is that He's going to lead us to do the right things. Some people you can't talk to enough, and some people you can say too much. 2 words is too many, and 2 words is too many. So you never know. It's hard to find the right balance. Even with raising kids, you wonder, I don't know. People say you're a good parent, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I think that's still to be determined.
My mother-in-law always says, you never know if you're a good parent until they leave the house and, and they're no longer under your influence. When they're on their own and they're making decisions about when they go, what they do, that's when you really find out, right? And even then, we can do all the right things, but kids have free will and free choice, just like we did as young people, right? So maybe next week we'll get more than 6 verses into it. It went by super quick today. I appreciate the participation. Did you have something else?
Her arm up for 45 minutes.
I'm sorry.
Yours.
I didn't mean to ignore you. I apologize.
I'm just going to say, we had 3 boys, and when they all married Christian girls, I thought, boy, I'm going to be, I don't have to worry about it now. Well, only one lasted. And they didn't have scriptural divorces. So, what do you do?
Yeah, you do all you can do, and at the end of the day, their free will is ultimately going to, dictate the circumstances at the end of the day. So, great participation again. Thank you, everyone, for the comments, and I'll see you next week.